Hi everyone, I'm Carly. Thank you so much for tuning into my video today. Today's topic is kind of a little bit of an interesting one for me. It's something that I didn't really know a whole lot about before doing this project. So today we're going to be talking about Valve and how they revolutionized organizational communications within the gaming industry. So let's get started. So Gabe Newell worked for Microsoft for 13 years. One of his biggest projects was making a port of Doom for Windows 95. And while he was working on this port, he noticed a few problems that he really wanted to address. He tried to address them within Microsoft, and they just weren't really responsive. And so him and Mike Harrington decided to form their own gaming company and try to solve those issues themselves. In an interview with YouTuber Zelkar Seliev, Newell stated, "We were trying to explain to them why device-independent graphics were a useful way of improving their applications, but everybody kept explaining to us that that couldn't possibly be the right solution, that everybody needed to develop their own method of taking advantage of graphics accelerators." So, they weren't satisfied with this answer. They wanted to prove that this could be done. So, Valve was formed. They would go on to release a handful of successful games, the first one being Half-Life, and then later on Counter-Strike. And the company found great success. They were doing really, really well. They had already made a lot of big changes within the gaming industry with the release of these games. In 2003, Valve would go on to launch Steam, and Steam is something that most people who play video games today are going to be pretty familiar with. It is a online marketplace basically for video games. And they formed it because they wanted a way that they could release patches and updates for their games automatically without the user having to manually download them and being offline for several days. And then in 2005, they made it available for third-party distributors to also release their games on Steam as well. This really revolutionized the game industry in a massive, massive way. However, with the launch of Steam, there were some issues, and that's what we're really going to talk about today. They were in the process of releasing a sequel whenever Steam was launched. So the launches actually coincided in such a way that they made it so that downloading Steam was required in order to get Half-Life 2. This was a very, very tasking and very grueling and very difficult time for the company. Typically, whenever Gabe Newell talks about this time in the company, he does not speak of it fondly. They knew that there needed to be some changes made. They knew that stuff needed to change. So they transitioned to a flat organization system. So what that means is that beyond executive management, beyond that, there are no bosses, there is no management. And they also have an open allocation system, which means that employees can basically work on whatever they feel like doing. So there are no department. If you are a character designer and you feel like you don't want to do that anymore, you want to work on designing user interfaces, you can. So this flat organization system actually solves quite a few of the conflict styles that Keaton and Beck talk about, mainly process conflict and task conflict. In the book, Keaton and Beck state that process conflict occurs when group members have disagreements about which group member is assigned duties or given access to resources. About task conflict, they state that it is rooted in issues or ideas or disagreement about some aspect of the group's tasks. There is a lower likelihood of these kind of conflicts happening with the flat organizational system occurring. The responsibilities of progress are placed on the individuals. There is no manager overseeing them. And they don't have departments to oversee the work that they're doing. They have to put trust that they are doing it well. That being said, there is a lot of increased responsibility. So you're not going to have a whole lot of conflict where it's like, my manager is on my case because he thinks that I'm not getting this stuff done quickly enough, but I'm doing as fast as I can. There's none of that because you don't have a manager. You are working on your own pace, your own timeline. The only person you have to answer to is yourself. Again, there is going to be a lot more responsibility that is encapsulated with that kind of management style, with that kind of organizational system. About increased responsibility, in an interview with Bloomberg, Gabe Newell talks about this, and he says, "If somebody is screwing up, we don't have a whole lot of internal controls to monitor that. We assume people know what they're doing. On Half-Life 2, one of the engineers made a bunch of really bad decisions. There was no monitoring system along the way, so it took us about 6 months longer than it should have for us to catch it. It caused everyone on the team a whole bunch of extra work. So if you're not being honest about the mistakes that you made or the quality of work that you are giving or the capabilities that you can do, this system is not really going to work as a group member. You really have to be honest and upfront about your shortcomings to be an effective member in this kind of group. This also means that essentially stuff gets done whenever it gets done. A lot of times, like, there will be tasks and projects and things that simply nobody really wants to work on, and so they don't get addressed for quite some time. In an interview with Develop Magazine, Eric Johnson, who is an employee at Valve, talks about this, and he says, "No one here decided to do anything about PS3 development, and the way we vote to do something about it is to simply start working on it. That's why we're working on the PS3 now, because we had about 4 engineers, some of which who have worked here for a few years, who were annoyed that we hadn't developed for the platform, and they were willing to cross over." Newell also states later on in this interview about time crunches and deadlines and things like that. "People pick up their shovels and start digging. Since everybody gets used to this idea and no one tells them what to do, everybody gets used to this idea of picking what's best for them to work on. And it's amazing how much more productive people can be when they're setting their own agenda." What can we learn from this? Newell talks about how this kind of thinking, this kind of organization, is kind of imperative in their industry. In that same interview with Develop Magazine, he later states, "If you're trying to invent things or do novel things, a really strong hierarchical organizational structure can get in the way of that. Right now, it feels to us that the games industry is changing faster than it ever has since we started Valve in 1996. As much as we've tried to be flexible and adaptable in the past, today is more important than ever." The system can be successful, and it's worked for Valve for quite some time. Some of the interviews that I'm pulling from here are from 2011, and they've been running the system since 2003. And they still function on this system today. So clearly it works for them quite well. But, however, that being said, like I said earlier, it does require people who are passionate and very skilled and honest about their shortcomings. This isn't going to work if you are there passively. Because, again, it really is a team effort, and it requires you to care about the work that you're doing very much. You have to have a unified team goal. Doug Lombardi, an employee at Valve, actually talks about this philosophy with us gamers. He says, "But our hiring policy is all about trying to find people that are the best at their craft in their field. Always having people that can manage themselves and teams that can manage themselves. We don't have producers. We don't have a top-down hierarchy. Nobody writes a design doc and hands it to somebody and says, 'You go build this.' It's the teams that are coming up with the ideas and pushing in the directions that they want to take the product." So, in conclusion, the flat organization system is risky and it is unusual, but for Valve and its employees, it works because they have passionate, dedicated, and talented employees that are working with them. It helps them to feel valued. It really minimizes the task conflict and the process conflict that can happen a lot in organizations like this. That's all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!